You're watching Reality Check. As India struggles to expand its vaccination drive, controversy is mounting over what some are calling discriminatory pricing by the top two vaccine makers supplying to India, Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech, with both vaccine makers citing considerably higher prices at which they're selling to state governments and private players than what they're selling to the centre. One possible outcome of the backlash has been that both have reduced the rates at which they're selling to states. Even so, it remains 3 to 4 times as much as what they're charging to the centre. The current rate card stands as such. For Covishield, which is produced by the Serum Institute, it's the 150 rupee price to the centre, but 300 rupees for states and 600 rupees for private hospitals, while for Covaxin, again the same 150 rupees fixed for the centre, but 400 rupees for states and 1200 rupees for private hospitals. Now, private players have justified the higher rates by arguing that they've invested their own funds in the risky venture of making vaccines amid a global pandemic, and they're justified in earning higher profit margins. But others have pointed out that both vaccine makers have in fact received considerable support, financial and otherwise, from government and, well, from wealthy private donors. In the case of Covishield, 97% of the funding for the development of the Oxford vaccine came from the UK government, departments, as well as British and American scientific institutes, the European Commission and charities. Oxford then entered into an exclusive deal with the British drug maker AstraZeneca, and SII entered into a deal with AstraZeneca purely as a manufacturer and distributor. Also, ICMR had funded and taken the lead in conducting what are called bridging trials, the only scientific requirement for approval in India. SII has also received $300 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to support its making the vaccine, in response for which it's meant to supply 200 million doses at $3 each to the Gates Foundation for 92 low and middle income countries. SII claims to have invested over $100 million for a manufacturing plant. Adar Poonawalla in an interview has said that they've committed hundreds of millions of dollars, wouldn't have done that if he didn't believe in the AstraZeneca vaccine, but not specifying specifically in what areas. Again, if one looks at the Bharat Biotech Covaxin, ICMR's National Institute of Virology in Pune performed the task of isolating the virus strain. ICMR was involved in some of the pre-clinical trials of the vaccine, as well as clinical testing and human clinical trials. ICMR listed in the government registry as a source of monetary or material support in the phase 3 trial. Bharat Biotech has received Rs 65 crores to ramp up production from the Department of Biotechnology. The exact agreement between Bharat Biotech and ICMR and the Department of Biotechnology is unclear. This is according to media reports as well as multiple government sources as well as press statements by these companies. NDTV has reached out to Bharat Biotech, Serum Institute and the ICMR, but so far we received no comments from any of them, at least till the time of airing of this show. All right, joining me tonight on the show with us, I have first and foremost Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, Executive Chairperson, Biocon Limited. Thank you very much indeed, ma'am, for joining me on the show. Just to start off by asking you your take on this conflict which has erupted over these vaccine manufacturers charging higher prices to state governments and private players. As I just pointed out, there is one argument that they have received considerable material, intellectual and financial support from government and other agencies. And is that still then justified that they will be charging higher rates or differential rates?
So, first let me tell you that the way you're projecting it does not make business sense.
Okay.
Because by people giving money to procure vaccines as advance payment doesn't mean that they're paying for setting up those facilities. When you give advance payment, the company has to buy raw materials, the company has to operate the plant and produce the vaccine. So that is like an advance purchase. That doesn't mean that they have funded the entire vaccine manufacturing operations. Okay, to set it up requires a lot of investment. And as far as you're talking about Serum Institute saying that everybody else has supported, the development of the vaccine and all they had to do was manufacture the vaccines is incorrect. because I think Serum Institute has invested a great deal. I don't even think you understand what is the cost of technology transfer, what is the cost of scale up. You know, all this requires a huge amount of investment, which I don't think anybody understands. And I think you have to be very realistic about how this business runs.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it is getting very, very minimized in terms of your poor understanding of how this business operates. Now, personally, I believe there should have been two kinds of pricing. One should have been what the government procures at in terms of bulk pricing, and there have been a private pricing which should have been allowed to the vaccine makers in terms of what they can offer the private sector. Today, because the negotiated price with the government was a unilateral price imposed on the vaccine makers, it has led to a lot of confusion.
Okay.
I think the vaccine makers need two prices, one for the private market and one for the government. I agree that the price between state and center should not be different,
Right.
but they are justified in saying that they can have a different price for the private market and a different bulk procurement price for the government.
Okay. So, just a few points. When you say that your poor understanding, I just want to make it clear that this is not necessarily an argument I am personally making. I'm just setting out arguments made by others in response to the argument made by these vaccine makers justifying their higher prices. Number two, I didn't specifically cite any instances of advance payments. I was citing instances where the technology and the development of the vaccine has happened elsewhere, and that has been passed on to Serum Institute.
Yes,
and in the
but
case
that
of
is
Bharat
in
Biotech, passed on by ICMR to manufacture the vaccine, which
That's
runs
okay,
counter to their
Vasu.
claim that they've taken a risk in actually developing these vaccines. That's an
I'm
argument
sorry,
that's being
the
made.
risk that
You're
they have
welcome to
taken-
challenge it, but
I'm
it's not my
sorry,
argument.
I'm challenging that very statement you're making, because the risk that these companies have taken is to technology transfer and scale up these vaccines at their cost. It's
Okay.
a cost.
So, explain the risk to me here, because you are getting an assured market, right?
No,
no. You
I-
are going to
let me
be,
be very
you are going to
honest
be
with you.
picked up by governments and everyone else who needs the vaccine. So,
So
where's the
Vasu,
risk?
let me remind you, when Serum Institute took the technology from Oxford University,
Okay.
but at that stage, the vaccine was just being trialed. In fact, it hadn't even started clinical trials.
I see.
They took the vaccine technology, they actually partnered. I must actually tell you the sequence of events just for your information.
Okay.
Took the technology from Oxford University, who wanted a partner, a manufacturing partner.
Yes.
They took the technology, they scaled it up for Oxford University, and were prepared to give them the clinical supplies. In the meantime, AstraZeneca,
yes.
look, it started with Oxford University and Serum Institute.
Yes.
Then halfway down that partnership, AstraZeneca intervened and hijacked the whole program from Oxford University and allowed Serum Institute to continue with what they were doing with Oxford University, for your information.
Right.
Then AstraZeneca used other contract manufacturers to manufacture the vaccine and started their clinical trials.
Right.
In the meantime, please understand that Serum Institute did the technology transfer, did all the development and scale up at their cost, and taking the risk, not knowing whether this vaccine is going to be approved or not. Remember, they've taken a big risk. They produced a certain quantity of vaccines, which is very expensive, by the way.
Okay.
I don't think you realize how difficult and expensive it is to actually get into multiple batches while you're doing the technology transfer and development.
Sure.
So all that is at your cost. Okay, nobody helped them there. Then even the money that you talked about from Bill and Melinda Gates was an advance purchase contract.
Right.
Even the government is offering them now
Yes.
is an advance purchase contract.
Of course, the government advance is a separate issue. But what do you make of when you talk about expenses? Adar Poonawalla, in an interview to us a while ago, had said that even the 150 rupee price does allow him to make profits, but those are small profits. He said it's not super profits. One argument being made is that in a time of a pandemic, when you're in the middle of a public health emergency and these vaccines are being cleared for emergency use, that one shouldn't do price gouging. One should, yes, certainly make profits, but not aim for super profits.
I can't comment on what other Poonawalla says. All I know is that at the time when the price was set, all the vaccine makers, at least both the vaccine makers, did say that this was not a price point that they were comfortable with.
Sure.
Because it would not allow them to reinvest what they needed to expand their businesses significantly. That is what I understood. Now, if he's saying that these were adequate, then I rest my case. But from what I understood from both the vaccine makers was that they would have liked a higher price. And if you remember, in the early stage, they were allowed 250 rupees and 300 rupees. And then it was halved to 150. At that was the point where they complained. They did not complain when they were given 300 rupees.
Right. What do you also make of the debate, ma'am, about the intellectual property rights of these vaccines and the patenting issue, especially in the case of Covaxin, which has been jointly developed with ICMR, in a sense with the government, that at a time like this, patents should not be treated as exclusive. The patents should be shared with a host of other manufacturers so that you get the maximum possible output.
Yes, I think there is something and a growing concept that there should be a pandemic's patent pooling, where, you know, patents should actually not be enforced during such a time, because it allows companies to actually develop vaccines which are approved at speed. Now, in fact, let me also inform you that Moderna themselves have actually not enforced their patents on their mRNA vaccines.
Okay.
I think there are lots of these kind of measures. Of course, there has been an effort from various countries, including India, to seek a patent waiver from WTO.
Sure.
This, of course, has not yet been well received or supported by Western companies. But having said that, I do believe there is a need for a pandemic patent pool to allow companies to actually start developing vaccines if they can. Speed and scale. So that is something which I think we should look at. And this patent pooling should be governed by somebody like either WHO, COVAX, or one of these kind of agencies who can start sub-licensing that patent to like voluntary licenses given to various countries who can actually then use it.
Okay, so in the context of India, how would it actually work if the patents for some of these vaccines like Covishield or Covaxin are then shared with others? Who would actually authorize that, and how would that work, you think?
Well, I'm just saying it depends on who the custodian of that patent pool is, right? You need an international custodian of a patent pool. And then they are the ones who then, issue the sub-license to or a voluntary license to various companies. Now, it's not that easy. I mean, today, even if you get access to a patent, you have to go through the whole process of developing the vaccine as per that process.
Right.
And that's what takes time, Vasu. It's not a question of a plug and play. That easy.
I'm sure these are...
It's not that you can create a vaccine in 24 hours.
Of course.
If you have access to a patented technology, it will take you time before you can scale it up.
Okay, fair enough. No, I fully understand these are highly complex issues and processes. But just to come back to the fundamental question, you believe that the vaccine makers are definitely justified in charging a higher price in the private market, but you believe that as far as the government is concerned, it should have been a flat rate for state and center.
Yes.
There shouldn't be any discrimination there.
Yes, I personally believe that should have been the case.
And do you also think that even if they were charging different rates for state governments, it should have been something that was ideally arrived at through some kind of negotiation or tendering process?
Well, I think, there should have been a better negotiation. It should not have been forced on them. What started this whole price controversy was the unilateral price fixing by the government of 150 rupees. I think the companies had any problems with the initial pricing which they started with, which was the 250 and 300 rupee pricing.
Right.
That was fine in the initial stages. But I think what shocked them was that the government downward revised it to
Right.
150 rupees. And that's where the whole thing started.
Right. So you then you had that on one hand, and then you had the unilateral sort of rate card announcement by the private players, and I think between both there was a bit of a blow up. Okay, we are going to open it up to panel. Kiran Shaw, we'd love for you to stay, but you're also free to sign out as you wish. We have with us Dr. Vishal Rao, who's Dean Centre for Academic Research, SCG Cancer Centre in Bangalore, and member of the Expert Committee COVID Task Force, Government of Karnataka. Dr. Rajneesh Kapoor, Vice Chairman, Interventional Cardiology at Medanta. Thank you both patiently for listening in. Dr. Rao, your thoughts on everything we've been talking about the idea of the justification for vaccine makers charging higher prices to state governments or even to private players, given one argument that they have received some kind of public or other support.
Vasu, currently looking at the crisis that we are in, which is the need for scale up and ramp up of the vaccination drives, obviously what is seen is that there is a shortage of vaccines across the country. I think to add to what Ms. Kiran said, what we need to identify is what does it take to scale up to that extent to deliver to the population of this country.
Right.
And what is the infrastructural needs, what is going to be the needs, that the commitments that already Serum Institute or Bharat Biotech, for example, have already done to various other countries or to other distributors and other companies is what is still not clear to us.
Yes.
So at this juncture, it is very premature for me at least to comment on this, to understand. But what I obviously see is that scaling up is going to be a very complex problem, considering that we have fixed infrastructures and raw materials. How are we going to scale this up?
I appreciate the questions of scaling up. I'm at the moment on pricing, and I'm at the moment on the principle of the pricing. In principle, are you comfortable with the idea of differential pricing, or like many state governments particularly have come out and said that this is a big problem. You can't charge different rates to different entities.
Yeah, so that's where I would again beg to differ that at this context, there has to be synergy between state and center, but the private market on what it has to be will have to be understood based on what pressure the companies are facing for scaling up and the investments that various investors, distributors and all have done to bring this clinical thing till here. So that has to be dependent on that, and I'm completely aware that both companies have a moral responsibility at this juncture and would not unnecessarily exploit it for I think this is a more conscious capitalistic approach that one needs to take than and that would be more justifiable at this juncture, and they would do that.
Okay, Dr. Kapoor.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I'm very clear on the fact that it should be universal pricing. I think, differential pricing is not a good idea. The reason I feel, the whole of the patients and the whole of the society is worst affected by this pandemic, and they are already reached. Now, once they find that, in some state it's being provided at a lesser price and they have to buy it at a higher price while they are already going through these trauma, so it would escalate their rage, it would escalate their anxieties further. So I think it has to be universal pricing, no doubt. So this is an unprecedented situation. Government has to work out a strategy. See, once you must be remembering.
When you say universal, what you're saying is, you mean to say whether the rate for which it's being sold to government, central or state, and to private entities, all has to be the same? Is that what you mean?
I feel all has to be the same, because if you remember, I was coming to a point, there was a Swachh Bharat. There was a Swachh Bharat and the cess was included onto the employees that this is a Swachh Bharat taxing. And this is a situation where nobody would mind. We are losing right and left people. It may be a different scenario if you start thinking from the commercial aspects, from the company point of view, but as a nation it has to be thought by some policies of the government. I think nobody.
So one way around it seems to be what some governments are already doing, state governments, which are saying that we will take the hit, that is, we will buy it at a higher price, and we will essentially distributed for free. In that case, the public gets it for free, and those who can afford it can go to private entities and private hospitals and pay a higher price. And the companies also make a little extra money, which, as Kiran Shaw and others were saying, they can use then to invest to ramp up. So that's one workaround. But there's also the issue, Kiran Shaw, that if you do have differential pricing, whether that's going to create potential black markets and hoarding and so on. That's a fear.
Well, you know, Vasu, let me put it this way. If you want to avoid differential pricing, then you have to come to a reasonable pricing which everyone is comfortable with. In the sense, if the government, for instance, I have no idea what that fair price is, but if it is, for example, supposing you were to give a price of 500 rupees for all vaccines, you know, irrespective of whether it is the center, the state or the private sector. And if that is acceptable to the vaccine company, so be it. Okay. Now, I also know that there is a big, sort of concern today that if you want to introduce, for instance, the Sputnik vaccine, okay, it is going to cost a lot more price. I'm told Sputnik vaccine needs to be sold at a minimum of $10 to $15, okay, per jab. And that's because the process is very expensive and it requires two different kind of vaccine jabs in the 2 shots that they give and so on and so forth.
Right.
It's a complex process. So I'm just saying, how do we then make sure that all vaccines are priced equally? It doesn't happen that way because each vaccine has a different technology and a different costing.
Sure.
So I think, we have to be realistic. This is not a single vaccine. It is not a generic vaccine, so to speak.
Yeah.
There are different vaccines. The Covaxin production is very different to the Covishield production.
Of course. Yeah, between
each
the vaccines.
Vaccine maker is going to have their own pricing. Now, if supposing you start saying that no, all vaccines have to be the same price, all vaccines have to be bought at the same price, it's not easy to do that. So for me, it is about, like anywhere, when you do a tendering process, it's a bulk procurement which gets a lower price.
Right.
You want to sell it in small quantities.
Sure.
Private market, you're allowed to do that.
Okay. Well, yes, Dr. Kapoor. Dr. Rajneesh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Almost out of time.
Yes. Make a point here. Yeah, Srinivasan, the point is, see, if now we are into this heavy wave of corona, so we are losing huge infrastructure, we are losing huge economic loss. We are suffering that. So I am saying, if we compare now this loss versus investment by the government on these vaccines and make a blanket all over of these vaccinations all across the society, still it would be much better situation for the government.
Yeah.
I think one should not care about the finances from the government aspect. People would be ready to pay some extra tax for the others. Okay. It should be made universally. I'm not saying all different variants should be priced equally, but yes, one variant should be priced equally or universally all across the nation. Yeah.
Well, for the moment, the biggest challenge is to get enough vaccine in hand and get stocks to go up before we go in for, May Day, May 1st is coming up. That's the big concern. But let's see how it plays out. Thank you all so much for joining me on Reality Check. And thank you so much for watching. That's all the time we have. Goodbye.